Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is a continuation of our little whole chicken utilization series. In the last video, we broke down a whole chicken into just a few large pieces and used a garlic and honey brine to add flavor. In this video, we are going to be utilizing the brined chicken breast in a somewhat interesting way, but we'll get to that later. So in this video, we are making a ground poultry mixture that can be thought of as something for burgers or like ground sausage. And when I make beef burgers, I always like to add a little bit of beef heart when possible. So I thought the same could be true for a poultry-based mixture. I think even more so than with beef, these chicken hearts add a really nice depth of flavor to the ground meat mixture. But that is only the first secret ingredient. The real heavy hitter is the next thing in the food processor, and that is duck fat trimmings. It's very important to point out that this is not rendered duck fat that you might actually find in certain regular grocery stores or slightly fancier grocery stores, but the actual fatty tissue from duck trimmings. And we were actually able to source this from our butcher. They even had packages of it on the shelf sometimes. So I really encourage you to talk to either a good local butcher or even the butcher department of a supermarket. Ask them about duck, chicken, or even turkey trimmings that are going to contain a lot of fat. And that's if you care about keeping a mixture like this strictly poultry. Normally, I wouldn't necessarily care, but I wanted to as a proof of concept. So, alternatively, you could use pure pork fat, pork belly, or already cured bacon. And as you saw, we started with the hearts and then roughly half the fat before removing most of it and processing the remaining fatty trim. My dad actually has a pretty decent meat grinder, but I wanted to demonstrate this recipe with a food processor because it is much more common. And one of the main challenges with that is really just working in small enough batches. And again, this is the that was in the garlic brine from last week's video. And there are pros and cons to using brined protein for this, but we'll get into that later. Once everything was basically processed, you just mix everything together. And again, we're not being as careful as certain burger aficionados would probably be. Again, this is closer to a poultry sausage. We also ended up having to remove the chicken skin that we tried to include because the processor couldn't handle it. And despite some challenges, I think it really looks great because of those chicken hearts. To me, it almost looks like a pork and beef mixture rather than a poultry-based mixture. And I don't think a full recipe calculator is needed for this, but my ratios are on screen, and I will leave some suggested ratios in the video description. Again, with a food processor, you could get more texture control by keeping everything very, very chilled, and of course, using a grinder if possible. Despite those minor texture issues, it still worked out great, and we are portioning small sausage patties or burgers, depending on who you ask. We are going for just 60-gram or 2-ounce patties for a smash burger style preparation, and this has the main advantage of cooking through very quickly, which we definitely want for a poultry-based burger. We are also going to play around with slightly larger burgers and other ground meat preparations. It just requires a little bit of extra attention, and my dad was having a little bit of difficulty. Eventually, he remembered the teachings of the great George Motes, and we were back in action, still needing to regulate the temperature a little bit, because again, we want a good crust, but a definite cook through. We still need to watch out for sugar as well, because again, that does use the brined breast, which brings us to the major pros and cons of using brined proteins in a mixture like this. It, of course, adds seasoning and flavor, as well as some additional moisture. But obviously, too much moisture will inhibit browning, and any sugar in a brine will risk it burning or browning too quickly. So in the future, I will probably use unbrined chicken breast unless it is using up what I happen to have. The other secondary choices for my patty melt are pretty basic, so I won't really go into it. Again, I wasn't directly supervising, so I don't really understand the technique my dad is going for. He appears to be just taking things randomly on and off the griddle, but that is besides the point. At the end of the day, though, the chicken burgers or sausage patties, whatever you want to say, were really delicious. My goal wasn't to substitute a beef patty, but just make something with a similar composition. For most applications, I prefer chicken thighs, but I want to try and do more whole chicken utilization. So I wanted interesting applications like this to use up chicken breast. And I also think there are a lot of good reasons to utilize poultry more often and beef less often, primarily financial and environmental. And obviously, when most people talk about ground chicken and other poultry, it's also for health, but I make flavor the focus by adding that duck fat. So, despite the little tricks to make it richer and a little deeper in flavor, the focus is still the chicken and it is still really delicious. And I'm excited to play around with this mixture more in the future. I hope you try this as inspiration to make your own ground poultry, and please feel free to ask any questions. Otherwise, thank you for watching.